We are beautifully, melanated.
Welcome to the Beautifully Melanated podcast and Happy New Year. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah, and I'm back with my two lovely co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Karen.
And I'm Kay. Happy New Year to you and yours. I hope the first week of the year doesn't already feel like a month, which it does to me. It just feels like it's a blur from 22 to 23, but we're only 8 days in. So hope you're having a good start to the year. So tonight we are starting our child development series. But before we get into it, ladies, my what in the world is very topical. Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, is out on the 10th officially. It's already been published in some countries. I pre-ordered mine in October because I love the tea on that institution that is the monarchy. And I couldn't wait. But bits of it has been out in the press. I don't know if you've been aware of the bits that has been released or, his interviews tonight, one with Anderson Cooper. There's a couple more interviews out as well promoting the book. I'm very excited for it. I think burn the institution down. There's an African proverb that says the child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I feel like that's what they've done to Harry. They constantly persecuted the guy and his wife, and he tried every which way, even left the country, and they would not let up. So he wants to drop a bomb or two. I'm here for it. Wanted to ask you though, Sarah and Karen, what are your thoughts on memoirs in general, or Harry's in particular? Should they be published while family are alive? What are your thoughts?
I think they should definitely be published while family are alive. You know, I'm wondering, like, if he wasn't royalty, would people even question when he published it? I haven't read many memoirs, but this sounds like an interesting read, definitely. And you're right, Kay, he has been kind of ostracized, totally kicked out of the family altogether, really, and kind of punished. So I'm sure he's going to have a lot of tea to spill, and some heads will go rolling. But yeah, I think everyone's got a right to speak their mind, whether they're royal family or not. So I think it should be an interesting read. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'll let you know when my copy arrives. Karen.
So I think memoirs are very, very interesting. And his seems extremely interesting. So I saw on the news the other day just some sort of snippets about what he had included. Okay, so he talked about things that I think need to be brought to the fore. I think, in his own words, how do we bring about change if we don't talk about things? From that point of view, I completely agree with him. I think that the way they treated Meghan and himself, was just abhorrent. And their unborn child, etc. However, there are some things in there that I don't know if he needed to share. I have to say, I'm going to throw it out there. It might be slightly controversial, my view. However, there are some things I think he talked about, like him and his brother having a fight. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Him and his brother had a fight. I guess for me, that's siblings, right? Whether they were royalty or not.
Yeah.
Depending on what they fought for, you might have to remind me. I don't know if you know, Kay, but if they had a fight, two young men, two boys, whatever, not getting on, William's the older one, perhaps kind of overpowered him. I felt that was just sibling rivalry and it was just brothers.
So this is it, Karen. They didn't have a fight. William assaulted Harry. It wasn't a fight because Harry didn't fight back. Harry's a soldier. You could have bodied him if you wanted to. So he didn't respond.
All right. So what's this? Okay. So can you talk me through the assault? What did he do that was an assault?
So from what the snippets are, and bearing in mind it was translated from Spanish because the book was somehow leaked to the Spanish publishers before they got here.
That's right.
He recounts it as a physical attack, and I'm looking at the Guardian website and what they said about this. So Harry basically He said their relationship fell apart over his marriage to Meghan. And there was a confrontation at his London home in 2019. Harry says William called Meghan difficult, rude, and abrasive, which he says is a parroting of the press narrative against his wife. And the confrontation escalated. So William had gone to his place, his little two-bed shubeen, compared to what the rest of the royals live in. He was living in the outdoor shed. Anywho, he said, William grabbed me by the collar, ripping my necklace and knocked me to the floor. When he fell on the floor, he landed on the dog bowl and it broke and cut his back. So that's what happened. So had Harry fought back, yes, it would have been a fight between two brothers, but I do think an ex-soldier, but I'd done him. But he didn't fight back.
Okay, right. Okay, so I think we're addressing more than one thing. The issue for me is not about the fight or the altercation itself. It's the reason why they were having the altercation, right? So he and his wife were persecuted by his brother and the rest of the family. That is what the issue is. If they had been fighting for any other reason, and it wasn't a fight because he didn't retaliate. Okay, if William had hit him because they had a disagreement about anything else, would that constitute for assault? I have two girls. One has hit the other. Obviously, I don't like that. As a mother, I try to get in the way. Would I then say that one daughter assaulted the other? I wouldn't use that word. I wouldn't. So what I'm saying is, I think we're not... The issue for me is the way in which Harry and Meghan were treated. And I get it. It was disgusting. But to say that he was assaulted by his brother, perhaps is not a word I would use. I don't know.
Sarah, what do you think? Assault or sibling rivalry, sibling fight?
I think it's hard, really. I think it's hard to kind of understand it fully. I mean, there is sibling rivalry, isn't there? But I guess because it's his wife is mentioned in it, and really, to be honest with you, nothing was said about her that's particularly shocking, was it? I mean, come on, a lot worse could have been said, but it wasn't. It was disrespectful to him about his wife. I hear that. But I don't know. I'm not quite sure whether I think it was assault. I think more I'm kind of leaning toward what Karen says, more kind of sibling rivalry. And if we are thinking about it being sibling rivalry, then is it, what's the word? The word when someone, it kind of embellishes what's happened in order to score kind of media points. Because that's why I'd be interested to see what else the book is saying. Because is it this kind of stuff? Kind of like, I pushed my brother and he was annoyed because he said something about my wife or something. Because that to me is not that shocking. I don't find that.
Oh no, there's so much more.
That's why I'd be interested to know what else is in the book.
Yeah.
Two men, when she says your wife's difficult, I'll push you. That's not very shocking, is it, really?
The thing is, the establishment, as we know, is a racist establishment. It's built on colonialization, isn't it? So William is trying to toe the line, and he has to put up with a lot of things, whether he likes it or not, because he's next in line. And he has succumbed to that. He's said, I take this on. This is my responsibility. I'm going to carry this cross, flag, whatever we want to call it, because he feels that that's his duty. His brother, on the other hand, has got a different view and says, I love who I love. I can't help who I love, and I'm going to be with who I want. Sod the establishment. Sod all you all. I'm going to do what I want to do. That's going to cause conflict, And I just...
Yeah. So, Karen, are you saying if he had married a English rose, air quotes, the press would not have had as much vilification of his bride?
They may have found something else. Maybe the bride wasn't... I mean, I remember when William married Kate and they said she was a commoner,
Yeah.
But, I guess she's a commoner. She's not royalty, right? So, they'll say lots of things. The fact that Meghan is of colour, that's a whole nother thing altogether, isn't it? And I know she says she couldn't have stayed because, mental health was impacted, and I completely get that. But I wish she had have stayed, because there are lots of different ways you can fight this. And I just think it's
But she would have died. She was suicidal.
That's what I'm saying.
Does she stay till she's dead?
Well, hang on a minute. I'm saying because her mental health was impacted, I get that she couldn't stay. Whether she would have committed suicide or not, we don't know, do we? Right? So I'm not going to speculate in that sense, but I appreciate the fact that she felt she was not able to stay. And I understand that. I'm just saying, had she stayed, had she been able to, and had her mental health not been impacted in the way in which it was, that would also have been another way of fighting against a system that is inherently racist. Unfortunately, she couldn't do that. I get it. So now what we've got is a book just bearing all. And if that's how he feels that he wants to retaliate, fair play to him.
You know what it would have taken for Meghan to stay? For the palace to put out a statement condemning the racism she was facing, the death threats, the racial abuse she was getting on a daily. Had they put out a statement and stopped it, it would have stopped. But they just left the press to...
And I think, they weren't, they didn't protect her. They didn't... And I get that, and I'm not saying that she made a poor decision or that the decision was wrong. It was right for her. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there are lots of different ways to skin a cat, right? And this is the way in which they have chosen to go about it. From the bits I have read, there are some things in there I think are really just out of anger. That's my interpretation. He's just angry and he's just saying, right, well, for that, you're gonna get it. You're gonna feel it. And I hope that they really do stay together, because it's a really important message they're sending. I get it. Racism is not accepted, is not acceptable, and the way in which she was treated was just disgusting. And it wasn't just by them, it was the media, and the whole thing was abhorrent. However, the book, if I'm looking at the book itself, I feel like it's just retaliation, a lot of it. Some of it, the institution is what it is, right? He was born into this thing, and he's chosen to say, I don't want any part in it. And I respect him for that.
And what about Sarah's point, though, that everyone should be able to write their memoir whenever, being royal or not? What is different about Harry writing his memoir, which, let's face it, is going to generate millions in income, seeing as he's cut off anyway and he has to pay for his own security?
Well, that's a personal choice, isn't it? So, for example, I could come on this podcast and I could bear all about my family. Would that be helpful necessarily? It might, if I felt that by sharing certain things was going to bring about change. It might do, but I would have to be prepared for the fact that many, many people in my family would be greatly affected. There may be some things that I might share. Not that my family has lots of secrets or, that we're doing anything, but I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying, if I were to bear, I don't know, our deepest, darkest, if we had any, that would be hugely impactful. So if that is what his intention was, then he's certainly achieved that.
Yes.
So if that's what you want, then he's achieved it. Would I want to do that to my family? No, but I'm lucky. I have a very, very loving, nurturing family who I care for deeply, and he clearly doesn't feel that way about his. So,
they're horrible. They're the most dysfunctional ghetto wasteland family in the face of the planet right now. What else has he got to lose? They've took everything from him.
I think we're just forgetting the fact that the monarch, if we're just forgetting what the monarchy is. It is a racist institution.
Violent. Yeah. The most violent institution, front and center at the slave trade. They have made their money from the destabilization of Black and brown people across the world in their empire building. That's how they made their wealth.
Absolutely. And I'm not disputing that. So if then we would need to sort of overthrow the monarchy then, wouldn't we? And there are lots of people
it's got to go. It's got to go.
But then there are other people who I guess would look at it slightly differently, wouldn't they? And it'd be really, really interesting to hear what viewers have to say on this subject. If you have any opinions or you'd like to share your thoughts, please do email us. We'd love to hear from you.
We would, yeah. But I'm with Sarah. If I want to write a memoir, I'm going to write one. And Yeah, families are interesting, shall we say. And if there has been abuse in families, which they want to keep covered up, and someone's revealing it, we know they're going to be tortured for it. So, yeah, let the man speak, I say. I want to see that thing blown right up in my lifetime and maybe give us back our things that they stole from Africa, and then maybe they'll have some peace. So, yeah, let's hear from you, listeners. What are your thoughts on this? And let us know if you've read the book. By next week, I suspect I would have finished reading the book by the next episode. But for now, that's my What in the World. Thank you, ladies. I'm starting off the child development series by talking about brain development, how our brain develops. And the reason for this is we've spent some time in the last few months talking about mental health. But if you remember, our pilot episode was on parenting versus being parented, and still remains to date our most popular episode. So we talked about what can contribute to poor mental health and how our environment that we're raised in impacts our mental health. So I thought, well, why not then? Let's talk about what else we can do instead. Let's unlearn some intergenerational trauma. So, ladies, I'm going to try and not make it too information heavy. It's not a class, but it is the neuroscience of it. So I might ask you some questions to tease your brain, see what you know so far about brain development. Actually, let me do that before I start. At what age would you say, or from your knowledge, what do you know what age our brains stop developing? When our prefrontal cortex closes up fully and our brains are considered fully developed. Do you know what age?
60. I don't know.
60.
We're still learning though, because we still retain information. So does that mean the cortex is still? I don't know.
It's estimated to be around age 25. Right. From the neuroscience research. So around 25 is when you can say, yes, the brain has fully matured. But I'm going to go back to the beginning. So the brain starts to develop in the womb. And if you like, just to keep it real simple, consider it as 3 brains, okay? The brain stem, or the amygdala, or primitive brain, that starts to develop by 15 weeks in mom's womb. So a fetus at 15 weeks old will have the major structure of their primitive brain developed. And in late pregnancy, it develops even more rapidly. So we are already born with our primitive brain developed. This part of the brain reacts really fast. It scans for threats, physical, psychological. It controls our survival instincts. It also controls our bodily functions, like how we blink, our heart rate, going to the toilet, how we know when we need to go to the toilet, so forth, so on. And it runs on autopilot. This is automatic. There is no thinking. It's definitely not conscious. But it helps us to keep safe, i.e., you stick your hand too close to the fire and you feel the heat and you pull it back real quick. That was your primitive brain. But this is a part of the brain that puts us in one of 3 of our survival states, which is a fight, flight, or freeze, collapse mode. That's how soon it develops. By 6 months old, it's set. Our stress responses are set. So I have been a freezer in the past. Under stress, I'll freeze. I've learned through therapy to defrost quicker, shall we say. But freezing would be still my stress response. But as I've gotten old, I think I'm more of a fighter. So let me ask you, ladies, which would you say you are, if you're comfortable sharing? Under stress, fight, flight, or freeze, collapse?
I would be. So I'm fight. I'm less so now, but definitely, I think when I was in my early 20s, I would literally fight. I'd literally actually fight people. I'd fight like boys my age.
Yeah.
I'd literally fight them. And as I was in my early 20s, I'd fight them too. Boyfriends, they annoyed me. I would actually fight them. And they never, only a couple of them tried to fight back, but but they were trying to hold me like, stop.
Oh my gosh.
I'd be like, trying to lug like a bouncer across the face. It was terrible. I was so angry. I just wanted to fight them.
Yeah.
So that was definitely me. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Karen?
I would say that I am all three, depending on the situation.
Okay.
So for example, I have been in situations where I have just not known how to deal with something, and I have felt so overwhelmed with anxiety, for example, that I completely freeze. I can't even think, and I do nothing. I would say averagely after that, then the fight kicks in. I realize that I can't stay frozen for very long.
Right.
And therefore, I really need to pull everything out and I fight tooth and nail. I often say on this podcast how I am forever firefighting in my life.
Yes.
So, yeah, I freeze, I fight. On occasion, I resort to flight, perhaps less so. Yeah, so I think it depends on what it is. I think if I'm anxious about something that I feel powerless about, I might freeze. If I feel anxious about something that I know I can change, I'm more able to get into my sort of fight mode. And if it's something that I think requires me to just run away from it, then I might do that. Just depends. Then I
run. Because it's formed so early, starting in our mother's womb, our mother's stress responses and stresses in pregnancy are a huge contributor to how this part of our brain develops, because it's developed so young. So parental stress can impact on the baby. If mom is flooded with stress hormones, cortisol, then the baby will be flooded with the hormones. And mothers who are depressed or hugely anxious, that also gets passed on to baby, and they're more predisposed to depression and anxiety, particularly in their teenage years. So really, it's crucial for brain development, or for healthy brain development, I should say, that pregnancies run as smoothly as possible. Now, we know that's not always possible, but reflecting on my two pregnancies, they were very different. And the first one, I was hugely anxious because my son followed a rainbow baby. And in the second one, I was really chilled. And it really shows in their personalities and even their stress response. Now, looking back, is there anything jumping at you of your pregnancies that you thought, I was overstressed, or I was cool, I was chilled, and this is now how comes my daughter is this way?
I would say with my first, I felt supported. So I was in a happy marriage. I felt really supported by my husband. We were excited. It was our first child together. I didn't work. I was actually made redundant when I was pregnant. And actually, it served me very well because it meant I was at home. I did yoga. I ate well. And I really blossomed. That was a good pregnancy. I enjoyed it.
You did yoga. I'm so impressed.
Yeah. I'm even in a book, actually.
Oh, wonderful.
I'm going to share that book with you. Yes, I'm part of the illustration. So, yeah, my pregnancy was very good. It was healthy. I was happy. And I used to read to my unborn. So I remember having lots of nursery rhymes. And I remember reading somewhere that children can actually hear your voice from in the womb and they can learn. And I thought, I'll read her stories. So I read to my bump. And we have a really good relationship now. I guess time. I had time to work on myself. And I had time to kind of, I don't know, to nurture her while she was in the womb. And I think, I would say it's paid off. I think so. And I suppose my second pregnancy, the circumstances around that were slightly different. And I think that had an impact. So, I think it has made a difference. I think that where I was mentally during my first pregnancy was slightly different to where I was mentally with my second pregnancy. And I do think that's had an impact. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
So I've just got one daughter so far. Dot dot dot. Yeah, so I've got one daughter, and my pregnancy. The only problem with my pregnancy really was the hyperemesis I suffered.
Oh yeah.
Sickness that came on from about a month and a half of being pregnant up to about month 7. So
Wow.
I wasn't particularly stressed at that point. Myself and my daughter's father were in a good relationship. I felt supported. Um, the relentless sickness left me incredibly drained. Um, but a bit like Karen said, I was really connected to my daughter. I had a miscarriage before I got pregnant with my daughter, and then I remember I found out I was pregnant. I didn't even get another period. I was pregnant straight away after I miscarried my daughter,
Right.
which surprised me. And I was so connected. She was so wanted. And I was so connected.
Yeah.
I just loved her. The minute I saw, because I remember I had an early pregnancy scan because I had already had a miscarriage. I was entitled to that. And I remember I tell her now, she was just like a little jelly with a heartbeat.
Oh.
And that's
Oh.
my baby. And I just surged with love for her. And yeah, so apart from the sickness, I mean, I had a few back pain issues and pelvic issues and stuff. But yeah, just loved her so much. And yeah, now we're just incredibly close. We're so I can't imagine my life without her. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it definitely makes a difference. Definitely.
Karen, you're right. By 16 weeks old, the baby can hear mother's heartbeat. So yeah, they do hear. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing, isn't it? Yeah, it's amazing.
It is. I remember I had a pastor. I was in church at the time when I was pregnant with my son, and he had the most gorgeous, deep, rumbling voice, almost like an earthquake. And every time he preached, my son would kick for the entire sermon. And when he came for his dedication and the pastor took him from me, he looked at him as if, I know you. It was this moment. And it was captured on camera, this look on his little 3-month-old face, like, it's you.
It's you
That's
making all that
adorable.
noise.
That's so
Yeah.
lovely.
So yeah, babies respond. So because our brains develop so early, well, the brain stem anyway, which is the survival part of the brain, really important that, and I know, Karen, you're going to talk a little bit later on about how important it is to play, because it all forms part of how our children attach to us. So the second part of the brain to develop is the limbic system, or the emotional brain, or the hippocampus, if you know the scientific term. Now that's the second part of the brain to develop, and it starts to develop in infancy. So by 9 months old, it starts to function. It's a little bit slower than a primitive brain in its reaction times. Because if I ask you how often have you blinked in the last 5 minutes, you couldn't tell me. Unconscious. It's slower than that, but it's still so fast that it's unconscious. So this part of the brain deals with relationships, attachment, emotions, pain or pleasure, and instinctive behaviors. For this part of the brain to develop properly, it needs trusted adults whose brains are already well developed enough to help. So by that, basically, we're saying if a baby at 9 months old is not attuned to, so baby cries and mom isn't available, or mom is irritable, or dad too, or they're frightened by loud noises, etc., and they're not reassured, then that part of the brain doesn't develop properly. And in fact, research has shown that the brain that has had trauma impact on it is actually smaller in certain areas. It doesn't develop as it should, but thankfully, because of neuroplasticity, it can be healed. And the last part of the brain to develop are prefrontal cortex, and that's the thinking brain, and it's responsible for reasoning, learning, planning, logic, self-control, morals, relationships, empathy, and making sense of social relationships. And they can take on another person's perspective. Now, this part of the brain begins functioning around age 7 in children whose brains have not had trauma. So from age 7 to 25 is when this part of the brain develops. So it's the last to develop and is really slow. But this is the part of the brain that can keep a lid on the other parts of the brain when they work together. So imagine it's the manager, if you like. The prefrontal cortex is the manager. It regulates everything. But if there's danger, it will go offline because it's so slow, it's vulnerable to stress. So it tends to play catch up. So if there's a threat, you see a car coming really close to you, the thinking brain has to go offline. You don't need to think about velocity and speed and how long before it hits you. So that brain goes offline. The emotional brain has to go offline because you don't have time to think about, well, how do I feel about that car coming so fast at me? That has to go offline so that the survival brain will go move and you jump out the way. Now, when that has passed and you might go, oh, that was frightening, my heart rate's going. Your thinking brain can go, well, it didn't hit you. Thankfully, move out the way, whatever your internal dialogue is, and all is well. In the brain that has had trauma, that doesn't happen. One, the child is always in survival mode. So the emotional brain doesn't get a chance to develop, and the thinking brain definitely doesn't develop properly, which is why it's quite important when you look at the ages and stages of how our brains develop, that we are parenting our children in a way that supports that brain development. Now, in episode 1, we talked about the different ways we were parented. And I know beatings were very much a part of my culture growing up. And I was often frightened of my dad. Now, for all the time I'm frightened of him and wondering, how's he going to be? Or am I going to get beaten for this? My brain isn't doing what it's supposed to do, which is real childlike things. And these are the ways in which we can impact our children's development by not knowing the facts. So those are the facts, ladies. From pre-birth to 25, that's how long it takes our brains to develop.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Kay. That was really interesting. And it kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about, which is my experience of people perhaps not understanding that. And that's why I think it's really important to kind of get this out there. So I remember visiting my family, basically, an extended family in Jamaica. And I met with friends and other people. And I watched them, observed them around their children. And to give an example, there was a child who was playing with, I don't know, ornaments or something in the house. And I can only assume that it was because there was a lack of toys. What jumped out at me, what sort of struck me was that there were no toys for the child to play with. So my children had, dolls and, I don't know, tea sets and whatever else they had here, right? And then I remember thinking, this child and their siblings had no toys. So they started to play with, like I say, some ornaments or whatever that family thought they shouldn't be playing with, right? And they were absolutely chastised for it. Right. And I remember thinking, and it was so unsettling for me because I could see that this child was just being, as you say, a child. It was doing what it's supposed to do. It's inquisitive. It is, tactile and adventurous and all those things. And it felt as if this child couldn't be a child in this environment, A, because there weren't the resources and things that they could do that with. And B, the adults around this child didn't seem to understand the child's needs. I'm not saying that it wasn't fed or clothed or loved. I'm not saying that. But that's something that really, really struck me. The other thing I noticed was that, I don't know, just lots of things that would be quite normal for my children to do, for example, like, I don't know, just play. It could be quite frowned upon, like they'd say, go and sit down, or, and I remember
pick up a book.
Yeah, even.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, yes, the child can take up a book. We're not saying that it shouldn't be, but how do you encourage a child to sit and read? Do you sit with them? I know I sat with my children and read, because it isn't always intrinsic, learning and getting a book. Some children just love reading, but even those children, where does that love come from? Might it be from the fact that mum had read to them? Might it be from the fact that there were lots and lots of books they could choose from? Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I'm only picking Jamaica, and I'm not saying I've never seen this anywhere else. I'm just using this as an example. But there were certain people in Jamaica who I felt didn't understand child development, what was needed, ages and stages, right? I remember one child, I was in the market square and a child had fallen asleep while mum was talking to like a market vendor. And the mum absolutely laid into this child because it had fallen asleep. I thought, oh my goodness, that's not something that the child could help, but it was tired.
Yeah.
It was a boy, he was tired, and he fell asleep. And I just thought, oh my goodness.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, it just made me think, I'm not a perfect parent and I don't know everything about parenting, but I would really, really love to be able to just share what I know with other people who perhaps just don't have the understanding or whatever it is, whatever the barriers were to them being able to sort of nurture their children. I just thought, gosh, I would really like to do some work here. So yeah, that was my thought. I just thought I'd mention that. About you, Sarah?
It was interesting when you were saying about the reading, actually, because my daughter, she loves to read. She's always loved to read. I mean, she's a big bookworm, actually. She'll grab a book and she'll take it if we're kind of lining up for something. She'll read the book whilst we're in the line. She reads every single night, but I'm a big reader as well. And I don't know if she gets it from me. Her dad used to like to read as well. But like you said, Karen, again, I sat with her when she was little and I sat and read books with her. We looked at pictures when she was really young and kind of talked about what was happening. So yeah, there's that. When it comes to play, it's quite interesting you talked about that because I do a lot of work in my job with younger and with older kind of teens and stuff, especially with very, very young. I work a lot through play, and they just naturally, I say most young children I've worked with naturally are drawn to working with the sand tray, and the characters are drawn to working maybe with the paints, Lego, some to clay, some not so much to clay. But then say I'm working with an adult, it's like almost like they think twice. So say I might say to an adult, you know, could you draw a picture of yourself? They'll kind of look at me like, oh, well, I'm no artist. They always say that. No, it's not about that. It's not about you being an artist. It's about how you see
So
yourself.
true, Sarah. I get that too. I can't
it's
draw.
weird.
I'm not an artist.
Not an artist. I'm rubbish at art.
Played in years.
It's always that, isn't it? But a child, I could ask one of my clients under 10 to draw a picture of themselves, and they're straight there. Like, can I also make a robot of myself? You know, and it's straight away. Here's the face. Here I am. You know, but adults, they're so. I find adults so held back, and I know in my training up at the Institute of Arts and Therapy up in Islington, it is theraplay based. So a lot of the training we were sitting on the floor, learning how to work with the children at that level on the floor. And even in the training, I remember some of the people I was training with when we first started, and they said, look, a lot of the training you'll be doing is sitting on the floor with the kids. People would still say, I don't know. They didn't know where to put themselves. They really struggled, some people, with play. And that was a piece of work in itself. They just could not let go. And I think education is important, like you said, Karen, as well, because if you have a mother that cannot let go and cannot get down and play with their children, then they kind of pass that on. And it goes on and on and on intergenerationally. And the child that's told to not touch something or slapped or shut up or get the beatings then can't express themselves at all. And then we just continue on and on and on and on through generations. So yeah, it's essential. It's essential to be able to play and to just let go and just be with your children, if possible. And if you can't let go and be with your children, be aware of that so you can try and work on it. Yeah. Yeah,
that's my hope, Sarah. Based on what I said about what part of the brain is responsible for what, you see how particularly Black children are parentified and made adults long before their brains have developed the capacity to do adult things. So when they do child things, they'll get beaten for it. And even the whole phrase little man or little woman, and we think that's cute when a child is much more adult than child, is not cute. That child has not been allowed to develop at the stage and pace of her brain or his brain developing. And speaking of what Karen was saying about the beatings, I remember a phrase I heard over and over and over again growing up. And to this day, it really distresses me, including when it happened to me. So you're being a child, you do something that is considered naughty, you get one lick and every part of you is stinging. So the tears are coming naturally. And what will the parents say? What are you crying for? Shut up or I'll give you something to cry for. You just did. And I'm crying because it hurts. But if in their minds that's not nothing to cry about, crying is such a natural response to being hurt.
Absolutely.
But then they're telling you, shut up or I'll give you something to cry about. So in my little imagination, that could only mean death, because what's more painful than when you just beat me with the pomegranate thing? And every part of me is humming.
Okay, because I mean, there's that whole thing, isn't there, about people leaving babies crying. I've got a real problem with that as well.
Yeah.
To leave them to cry out, to let them cry themselves to sleep. No way.
No
I'm
way.
really against that. I'm just,
You know, that is honestly. So when my eldest was born, my health visitor came around, told me the same thing. She said, let her cry. Leave her. Once you've fed her, you know, her nappy's changed. She's tired. You just leave her in that cot and leave her. And I tell you what, I don't know. I think I tried it for like 10 minutes. It did not work. Because I'm saying this child is crying for a reason. She does not have the vocabulary to say, well, actually, Mum, I'm just feeling that, you know, she can't say that. Crying is just her way of getting my attention. And I thought, this is crazy. Like, why am I allowing and the thing is, it's quite controversial, this, because there would be lots of people who say, no, I put them in their own cot, in their own room. Once I knew they're fine, I shut the door and that was it. I'd go
and then we develop attachment difficulties and wonder why our children don't like us when they're older.
No, but I know lots of people who I've met through work, etc., who that's what they did. I thought, that just doesn't work for me. So in the end, I had her in my bed.
I did too.
Until she was about 3.
We need to listen to our children. I remember my ex used to say, and our daughter, he used to say, right, she was scared of the dark. She still is scared of the dark a bit. And he used to say, right, she's not having a nightlight. I'm going to shut the door. I had to do it. She's just going to have to deal with it. And I used to be like, I'm not sure. I don't sure about that. And now, since he went, ages ago now, years ago, I got her little nightlight, little LED nightlight, and she sleeps perfectly. And she said, I'm still a bit scared of the dark, Mum. I said, but you can have a nightlight as long as you need to. And she said, it didn't used to be allowed a nightlight, she said. And I remember I used to shut the door and I used to think there was something there and it scared me when I was little. And I said that was, I think that was wrong. I think what your dad did was wrong, personally.
Yeah. Because our child is saying, I'm frightened, and you're saying, well, don't be frightened.
Is that don't be frightened? You've got to get used to it. I just think that's just. But then looking at it, I imagine a lot of parents may think, well, if I had to they shut the door on me and I had to get used to it, you'll do the same.
Good.
But yeah,
it's really
and I turned out okay.
I turned
out okay. Well, if you're saying that you're not okay, you in fact did not turn out okay.
Definitely did not.
If you suffered and you want your child to suffer, you're not okay.
No way. That's really just not acceptable. No.
I tell you what, it is difficult. I do understand that what your then partner was trying to kind of teach Naya is that she will be able to sleep without a nightlight, right? So you can be independent. You don't have to rely on a nightlight, and you can make it through the night. I get what he was trying to say, but I guess it's the way in which we do it. So
shutting the door, we didn't have to shut the door. We could have closed the door with a slit of light outside and landing.
Exactly.
That's what I had when I was a child.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there are ways in which
turn off all the lights and scare you.
You could even do it in stages. So you could have said, okay, tonight you'll have a nightlight and I'll shut the door. Yeah. Tomorrow, what I'll do is I'll take the nightlight, but I'll open the door and you'll have the light from the hallway.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And so it could be in stages. So a lot of my work, we use step-by-step plans to do that, sort of like gradual exposure to the thing that the child's afraid of.
Yeah.
And it is tricky. And that's why I think this conversation is so useful, because I think as a parent, you don't know what to do all the time. It is a minefield, and we're trying to work out, what is the best way to parent my child. So I think that, there are different schools of thought here, but I think that there's a better way of exposing your children to something, isn't there?
Intuitively. If you feel the baby's crying and needs you, don't leave that baby in the cot.
So I'm so glad you said that, because the book I took the neurodevelopmental bit from is a book by Sue Gerhardt called Why Love Matters. And it's because affection shapes a baby's brains.
Yeah.
So love shapes the baby's brain. So if you're leaving your child alone with their only form of communication being crying, and you ignore that, you don't know what they're trying to tell you because you've left them in their cot to cry. Their brain does not develop in the same way. And this baby will learn nobody's coming, so I'm going to stop crying. This child is going to be a compulsively self-reliant child who doesn't need anything from anybody, and then will grow up, will have real difficulties in attachment and relationships because they've always had to figure it out themselves as a baby, left alone to cry.
Yeah.
That reminds me, Kay, I'm not sure if you've seen on Netflix that Big Boys Don't Cry. That is absolutely.
I haven't seen it yet.
It's very, very. It's a true story of a guy that was given up into foster care from birth, or from 1 week old.
Right.
And he grew up in a boys' home in the 1970s. It was horrible.
Wow.
Run by paedophiles, basically.
Oh my God.
No.
And
no.
He struggled desperately his entire life and became like that. You said over self-reliant, totally cut off. And it kind of shows him in different stages of his life, went to jail for years and years, came out again. Highly recommend that listeners see it, but watch with caution. It's incredibly harrowing, and you've got to have it. You've got to have a day you feel resilient, because if you don't feel resilient that day, don't watch it. You'll take part. But in the end, he survives. I mean, he ends up he wants to take his life at one point because he just can't cope, A, with the PTSD from his life, and B, he tries to have a relationship actually with a woman, and he just can't connect. And she just says, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And he goes, "Well, my whole life pretty much, but I don't know what to do with myself." And she says, "How do you mean?" So he said, he used to stand there and shake. So, and he ended up going on to have two, interesting enough, he had 2 small boys himself. And now he's able to, with help, parent his children and have a marriage. But it was interesting what you said, because he never got shown love, ever. He never, ever had a parent from day dot.
No. Wow. From birth?
From birth. I think it was either birth or 1 week old or something.
Good grief.
Straight into the foster care system, into the boys' homes. And we all know back then, 1970s, Essex boys' home was not.
Yeah. He'd have been abused from very early on, not just sexual, but there's the neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Yeah.
Stuff they don't show. They insinuate what's happened to the boys and stuff. The boys are scrubbing things in a sink. It's horrific but I highly recommend. It's an interesting one, but it's hard. It's hard. But that's an example of a boy that even from a babyhood, from newborn stage, I mean, where would he even be, Kay, with the brain stem there? I mean, no one even cared about him. And the foster care, the foster home would keep saying, "You're crap, you mean nothing," and everything. It's horrible. And that went in his head and ringing round in his head until his early 20s.
So he would always be in survival brain because there was always a threat, always danger.
He went on to be a bouncer.
That makes sense. That completely makes sense. And of course, the emotional brain, which would help him to develop relationships and attachment, that wasn't developed at all.
No.
So of course he couldn't have a relationship and would fight.
Mm-hmm. He did boxing
as a response. Of course.
So it's a perfect example of what you were saying about the brainstem.
Yeah. And that's what I feel we need to address intergenerationally, because our parents, well, I'll speak for mine, they parented the way they were parented. It's just a pattern repetition.
Yeah.
Children are seen and not heard. I remember once putting my feet up on the sofa at a family friend's. It's my dad's relative, and I was visiting, and I put my feet up on the chair. Oh my God, the beating I got. You could have just said, take your foot off the chair. But the beating I got for putting my foot up on the chair, like, I'm a child.
Did that happen immediately as you put your feet up? Did it happen at the
No, which is worse, because then
home?
you get home and you're like, well, what have I done?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's doing childlike things at the stage of which your brain can manage.
Yeah.
If you think the prefrontal cortex is responsible for, and I have to touch on this, reasoning, learning, planning, logic, understanding consequences, that comes online at 7. So you're expecting a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old to know, don't touch the figurines in the house.
Yeah.
That part of the brain is not developed. There's no logic and reason there. Yeah. Or you might say to a child, well, I'll do it to you, see how you feel. They won't feel anything but frightened.
Yeah.
Because that part of the brain is not developed for them to make that link.
Yeah.
But how often have you heard it? You hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Because that will teach you not to hit me. It doesn't teach them that. It just teaches them to suppress the anger you've just poured into them. Or you slap them back.
Another thing I remember from, childhood is things like, my parents didn't actually say this, but I did hear other people say it to their children. If you think you're bad, touch it.
Well, mine said it. As a child, did you touch it? Because Karen, go on. Did you touch it?
No.
Because of the tone of voice. The tone of voice will tell you.
Yeah.
They don't mean what they're saying.
Yeah. Like I say, my mum wasn't really, she didn't tend to say that, but like I say, I would go to friends' houses and cousins or whatever, and I would hear other people say that to their children. And I just thought, as an adult, I've sort of thought, that's a really silly thing to say. But all you have to say is, please don't touch that.
Yeah.
Because, or not even because, just don't touch it. But saying, if you think you're bad, touch it. Sort of
if you say that to an autistic child, they will touch it.
They will touch it.
Because they don't understand metaphor or nuance. They will touch it. And then you think, this child is really challenging me, so am I going to brock him up?
Yeah.
More violence.
Yeah. And I do wonder what happens to children who do have ASC in certain parts of the world or in certain communities where it's just not understood. And, okay, I've talked about my experience in Jamaica. I'll talk about my experience in this country where I visited a family and the child was not diagnosed, but using my professional judgment, was ASC, somewhere on the spectrum. And it just was not taken into consideration. This child was expected to do things that they clearly could not do, and were chastised heavily for doing things that perhaps an ASC child would do. And it's just so difficult to watch. And I tried to have conversations around this, but in some communities and some families, there is such a stigma attached to neurodiversity that was not received well. And that is, I think, still a struggle in many communities, just understanding neurodiversity and being accepting of it. And it kind of brings you back to the importance of play. I remember my my children's father not liking when they played on the floor. It's our floor. I could never really understand that.
Floor is where you play, surely.
Yeah, but he didn't like it. And I can only think that it came from when he was growing up. He was discouraged from playing on the floor. I don't know if it was red dirt.
Was he playful? Was he playful? Was he a playful person himself?
He was a very, very playful player. He was a very, very playful person, very, very playful with the children. Very, very playful. But he just didn't like them. He just felt that they would get dirty. And I said, well, she'll have a bath. But
that's Jamaica.
Yeah,
that's from Jamaica.
Is it? I guess that's what it was.
From sun up and you go outside, come back in till sun go down and you bathe and you clean. You stay and you play outside. Playing on the floor inside in the middle of the day.
Well, maybe that's
Unheard
where
of.
it came. Really, that's obviously.
Yeah.
And you see, like how he brought his culture or his upbringing
Yeah.
to this country and our household and our children.
Yeah.
And I used to think, like, she's just playing. Like, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
Because to me, the way I was raised here, you could play anywhere, really. Especially working in schools. I would more sort of think about my work, really. In schools, I've worked in early years, in year one, where a lot of play is child-centered, it's child-initiated, and it's, you can get as dirty as you like. And so I found that really difficult because to me, play is really, really important. It's really important that children can express themselves, have fun, and they learn so much through play. So I just felt as if their development was almost being stunted by them not being able to play on the floor. I just could never understand it.
It's funny you said that, Karen, actually, because my ex, never mind. My ex's family, some member in Jamaica actually said, remember I was saying, so beautiful down here, they live there. Wouldn't you come down here after school and play? And that particular individual said, no time for play. There's lots of work to be done and things to do. There's no time to play. I thought, wow, you lived in this beautiful location. You could have gone down to the water and played by the water and everything. But there's never time to enjoy it because there was too many things to do. So
Yeah. I mean, I played, credit to my mum particularly, she really encouraged imaginative play as well. So we would make a play kitchen and use fruits and stuff for the meals, and we would play on the way to school, we would play at school, and then we'd play on the way back home from school, did our chores, play a little more, and then go to bed. I played a lot, and
that's really good.
It's good because even now my imagination can just take me just about anywhere. I wasn't quite a prodigious child. I could read by the age of 3. So it was good that she encouraged me to play as well. Otherwise I could become quite stilted socially.
Yeah,
because
sure.
all day long I'd have my head in a book if you would let me. But I played and it's nice. But what play does, Karen, particularly for the brainstem, if it's experienced trauma or not enough attunement in those early years, like the young man Sarah talked about, it regulates. Play regulates, but it also redevelops that part of the brain that couldn't develop at the time because of the trauma. So play is not just have fun. It actually regulates our nervous system as well. I don't know if you get this, Sarah, but oftentimes after my sessions with children, particularly under 10, if the parent or the caregiver says, so what did you do today? They go, oh, we played. And I'm like, yes. The parent is thinking, what? That's what I'm paying for? For them to come and play with you?
Yeah, parents sometimes say that. It's like, hang on a minute, what was that all about? But
exactly.
Yeah.
Because play heals.
It's important, yeah. And I think I'm talking about slightly older children now, but if I think about some of the children that I work with, for them, play is almost non-existent now. It's more on their phones. There's a lot of sort of interactions with social media. I guess you can call it play. Obviously, there's game playing and that sort of stuff. And they do play. But it's not the same as when I was growing up. I'd play outside. We'd play until the street lights came on. And it's interesting, you asked a question, Kay, about when we stop playing as adults, that's a good question. I'm just trying to think, as an adult, or as adults, do we play? Do we still play? How do we find that downtime? How do we kind of release and relieve stress? What do you do for that?
Well, I play every day at work, literally. Part of my job, I play. But when I'm home, there are a few board games. We love board games in this house. We play Uno, card games. We play games that are competitive, like the ABC game. We don't run around as much as you would say play rounders or stuff when you were younger, but they're more get around the table, have some food, play competitive games, laugh till our sides split, and it's just wonderful. So yes, I still play quite a lot.
Do you play, Sarah, still?
I play at work again with the kids a lot. And I play with my daughter. She's still that age, so she still likes to play. So we still do that. But even then, even like you're saying about social media and stuff, obviously she doesn't have any social media, but she is allowed Roblox and she does play with friends on that. But again, we do board games and stuff like that. Jenga, she likes Monopoly. We did have the kids Monopoly, but she's like, no, she wants to go into the adults Monopoly now. So that's cool. We'll get the adults Monopoly. Yeah, she just likes, we I think also play. We like craft, and we like to make things a lot. So she likes little craft sets. We go to the Works. I love the Works. And we get little kits for stuff. And she made, what we made last weekend? Like clay cake stands and stuffed cakes and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I love putting stuff together and making stuff out of nothing and stuff. So she loves that as well. So yeah, even play when it comes to like cooking and stuff, like creating stuff, dishes, thinking about stuff. So yeah, I think I'm creative, and I'm playful to an extent. But I think as kids get older, especially with teenagers and stuff, it can be quite good to think, would they like to do something creative? So maybe they're not, as you said, like playing rounders and stuff anymore, but maybe could they do something to do with craft? Could they do some kind of, I don't know, some jewelry making? Could they do something using their playful side, age appropriate?
I agree with that. I found that in lockdown, that's when it really became apparent that I didn't do enough kind of play. So I guess I relied on, I don't know, going out and doing things. In lockdown, where you couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything, I really had to dig quite deep. And so I started playing charades with the kids.
I love
it was
that.
their idea.
I love it.
I love charades. And I loved
hilarious.
It's hilarious. And that inner child kind of came back, because I think you're right. I'm one of those adults who are guilty of saying, oh, I can't draw. Oh, I'm no good at arts and crafts. I can't do this. Because we become so conscious. I think there's a point at which you stop being a child, you stop being free and allowing yourself to play and just express yourself. And you just become so conscious of what you do and how others perceive you. I think that's probably what it is, that we don't want to draw or colour in or, and we just become so guarded. So like I say, during lockdown, I really had to dig deep, and I loved playing charades, and I didn't mind being silly and making a fool of myself, and I loved it. I think I need to do a bit more of that.
Do some more. It's the one of the funniest things. Honestly, that'll make me cry, tears down my face of laughter. My daughter, she loves that, and she can play it for about an hour and a half. We just make up stuff in the end. Make up stuff. And she'll even do like the neighbours. She'll take the neighbours off and everything, and people across the road, and yeah, it's really good.
It's so good. Like you, Sarah, I love the Works. I give it a wide berth if I have any money. Great. Because I know damage will be done. I just love this stuff. So much creative stuff. You're right. Even in the winter months, we can make together. Still a form of play. And allow our children to be children. And don't expect them to understand adult concepts, such as empathy, and think about me and holding you in mind and your feelings. They're not equipped to do that. You can model that for them, and you can see it. I don't know if you've ever observed. I saw my niece's daughter about a year ago. She was about 12. Yeah, she's about 18 months. And she took her teddy bear and she picked up the wipes and she was like, come. And she was cleaning the teddy bear like her mom cleans.
Oh, so sweet.
And then she wipes it just the way her mom would wipe, and she lifted the bottom up, and then she wiped it, and she took another wipe, and she was getting in there, and then she picked it up and gave it a great big cuddle. And I was like,
yeah, that's such a good example of how children learn through
modeling.
Yeah, we model behavior for our children to emulate. And the last thing I want to just mention is children that I have worked with over the years, where the expectation is that they will do chores. Now, I'm not suggesting that children should not do chores, not at all. Children can help around the house, and every family has their own rule, right? And I can't go into a family and say this is how it should be done or not. But I think just being aware of age and stage development, understanding that children won't necessarily see that certain things should be done. We might have to explain certain things. And where there is an expectation that they will help and tidy their rooms, etc., whatever the chores are, but there has to be time for play. They've got to be children.
Yeah.
And I think we just struggle so much to find the balance. So yes, I'm not saying, the children should do nothing at all and they should just sit on their phones. I'm not saying that. And if we are saying come off your phone, what are we encouraging them to do instead? Are we interacting with them? Are we spending time with them? Are we finding alternative ways in which they can, spend time in the evenings? Because it's easy for me to say, right, get off your phone. You've been on your phone all day, but have I provided her with an alternative? That's what I'm conscious of that. I'm thinking about what else am I suggesting? Am I saying, okay, let's bake together? Or am I simply saying, come off your phone?
Or go do housework.
Yeah, exactly.
Or go pick up a book or do housework. You're right, Karen. I was shocked when I came here and a lot of my friends were saying, oh, we could do a roast dinner by the time before we were 10. What? I can cook rice and peas from when? Oh, please, come on now.
Yeah.
That was never an expectation from my mom. In fact, I was 11 before she tried to teach me how to cook. And I behaved so badly. I just said, I'd just rather take the beating. I don't want to learn. I don't want to learn how to scale a fish. Beat me now. But I have friends whose experience was they had to learn to cook and feed the whole family from very early on. They didn't get to play. That is not okay. Our children are not little slaves. And they don't need to be treated as if we're still on a plantation and master is going to bust us up if we play.
Interestingly, though, a lot of people I work with, it's sometimes out of necessity. So if mum is a social worker, for example, and she works in London and dad is abroad because he's got several businesses elsewhere, that child, it's not because mum doesn't want them to play, but the family just needs this kind of structure where child is expected to come in, take food out of the freezer, perhaps maybe mum's made a stew on a Sunday and so they'll heat it up on Tuesday, whatever, collect siblings from school, sort that out. And that happens a lot. And like I say, it's not necessarily because the parents don't see the importance of play, but just family circumstances means that mum, dad, whoever might lean on that child and need them to be more adult than perhaps is ideal. And that's really hard.
But the irony is, Karen, you're looking after other people's children while yours are not having their childhood.
100%. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't agree.
That's also not balanced.
It's common. I know it's common. I know people that have siblings relying on siblings relying on siblings. Do I agree with it? No. I don't agree with it. No. I don't agree with it. I think if you're in a situation where you are leaving your multiple children with each other, I think you need to try and find a way to think differently about your life. I understand now and then you might need to leave. If you have an older child, you might need to leave the child with the younger one at different times. But I think if you do it all the time and you expect you're saying, I can't think, 13-year-old, for example, to look after your 3 youngest siblings, take them to school, cook for them, and all this kind of stuff.
No,
I don't think that's healthy, and it will come back and bite you on the ass when it gets back.
Yes, it will, and it will also impact the sibling relationship.
Yeah, it's too.
But I think people need help to be able to see ways in which they can make adjustments. Because I think when I've spoken to some families, I said, well, when I was back home, and I tried to say, well,
it's always them. It's always they were. It was always them. So they had to do it. So why can't their children do it?
Yeah.
But yes, just because you had to do it doesn't mean it was right. So
doesn't mean it's right. Yeah.
There's no thinking past that. It's like this. I did this, so they'll do this. It's very.
Or families will say, I completely agree. Or families will say, but that's my job, that's my work. What do you suggest I do then? What can I do about it? I've got to go to work
around them or don't have the children. I planned my family, and I'm probably going to sound real judgmental here, but I had 2 children for a reason. I didn't want more than I could care for emotionally, not just physically provide a bed and all of that. I knew my children would need me emotionally. I didn't think I could stretch myself to 3 and 4 children. How do I meet all their needs if I'm busy, distracted, looking after their siblings? But equally, I didn't want my oldest to do any of that. The school run as a responsibility. Occasionally he did it, but he needed to have his teenage years too. And So it goes beyond that. It goes, okay, plan your family. How many children can I afford to have? How many children can I afford to have while still being a good parent? Because if you're busy running around saving children who are in care, if you're a social worker, wherever you are working, but your own children are neglected, it's like pastors' children. You're busy serving the whole congregation and their families, and you leave yours. That is also not okay. So if you have to, then you plan around them, but otherwise, plan your family. Adjust your schedule. Be there for your kids.
That is, honestly, I think that is a really, really important message. The other thing I would say is that I've also worked with lots of families who are foster carers.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that lots of children who live in homes where parents are foster carers also have attachment difficulties.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool.
And even childminders. I find that where parents are spending time childminding, their own children seem not to be getting whatever it is they need. So those, I would say, those are two types of families doing particular types of work where I've had to sort of offer interventions to those children, because I guess it's time, isn't it? And I'm not saying you can't do those jobs. I'm not suggesting you can't foster and you can't be a childminder. What I'm saying is I think you have to be really, really mindful of the time you are actually spending with your own children and the impact your work might be having on your own biological children.
I agree. And this is part of the reason I did what I did and stopped working like I did as a school counsellor forever, because I wasn't getting enough time with my daughter, and TikTok, life was going by, and I wasn't able to spend much time with her because I was forever trying to support other people's children.
Yeah.
So, that was a part of the reason that I wanted to do what I did and become self-employed, because I wanted to be able to take my daughter to school, pick her up from school, sit with her, eat dinner with her, talk to her about how her day's been, catch up with her, spend time with her. None of that. I couldn't do any of that in my life.
Right.
And it was just getting to the point I thought, do I want to do this when she's at secondary school? No, I don't want to do that. So, I think
it's hard.
It's hard. I was intentional about how I wanted to do it. So I did the school run morning and evening. I was there for sports day, assemblies. I wouldn't change anything. I loved it. And I used to love seeing them come out at the end of the day. It's like, oh my God, I've missed you. Can't wait to hear how your day went.
Yeah, exactly.
It meant I didn't have material things because I worked part-time or I worked when they've gone to bed, because I didn't want someone else to raise the children I had. I wanted to raise them. So I swapped the material comforts and earning lots of money and career. I put that on hold because I wanted to really enjoy motherhood. And that was intentional from the start. I didn't have children and then reacted to, oh, this is a circumstance. Now what am I going to do? I planned and I loved it and I wouldn't change it for the world. It was delightful. I'm glad you're having that now, Sarah, because honestly, the joys of school assemblies when you can't hear a thing except your child.
That's it. It was maybe quite sad though. I realised that when my daughter was quite young, there was a couple of times when they put on shows and stuff, I remember, and I didn't go because I was at work. I remember one time she cried, and said, what about you there? And I thought, God, you know what? I should have been there, because no job is more important than me being here with you. It really isn't. It really isn't. And so I think for people that say, oh, well, I've got to do this job and, my oldest one's going to have to look after my youngest. I understand if you're saying that in another country where there is hardly any work, I get it. But in the country we live in here in the UK, I'm sorry, but like Kay said, you work around it. You've got to have found a job. There must be something else that you can do that's more suitable for your oldest child and not looking after your younger ones. There's got to be something you can do that's not destroying that. This must be.
Or taking their childhood away.
Yeah, exactly.
You're a teenager, but you're still a child. Legally, you're still considered a child. So
yeah,
it is hard though.
I was a single mother whilst doing this, Karen, so I know how hard it is.
Yeah.
No, I know how hard it is.
Yeah, and I'm just hoping that by sharing this, we are just helping people to kind of think about their own lives, their children, how they can make adjustments wherever they can. And I'm not suggesting that, this is easy. I think we are all educated women and we therefore have an amount of choice. I think there are some people who are going to be in positions where, and there are always options. Yeah. And I completely agree. I just want to just say that it's not easy, right?
Do you think partly it is what you touched on earlier, one of you guys, about living in this country, but bringing your values and your ways of being from your country and implementing them here? So in Jamaica, as I imagine in other countries, the village did raise the child. There was always someone. So if my mom had 5 of us, but we couldn't misstep because the neighbors were on it. And so if she had to pop out, we would be looked after. You see what I mean? So it's a different setup then in Jamaica.
Well,
I couldn't expect to live like that here in England.
Yeah.
But the thing is, even not as far as Jamaica. So my family from Bristol.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that if I had my children in Bristol, if I couldn't pick them up, somebody else would. My family's huge. We'd all be very supportive, blah, blah, blah. Because I live in Kent, I just don't have that support. I mean, that's my choice, arguably. I didn't have to live here, but this is my situation. So I wouldn't even say it's country necessarily. It's just geographically where you live. If you don't have family support or lots of friends or whatever. I mean, I've had to network and sort of be friends with other parents because that was really the only way I could make this thing work, right? Yep. So, yeah, it's not... Yeah, it's just about having support of any kind, really, isn't it? But in terms of values, so I was born here. So my parents' values are, they are Jamaican. And like I said in the first episode, some of that I've kept. The bits I think work and the bits I don't think were very helpful, I think I've kind of got rid of and come up with my own set of rules. And my children, I'm sure, would have lots to say about the way in which I parent them, but I think you take a bit of both, don't you? It's what you know, what you've learned, what it encompasses my work and the people I've met. But yeah, I guess I must have taken some of my experience of being parented and brought that into how I raise my children. It's inevitable, I suppose, isn't it?
Quite so. And the learning bit for me is that when you catch yourself doing it, because that's what you always knew, and you realize it's not helpful, rather it's harmful, then that's the time to break that cycle.
Absolutely. I think, being reflective is key for me. Yeah.
I think we're at time. So I wanted to end with a little stat for parents. Well, for us too. The first 1001 days of your child's life, so that's 0 to 2, are the most critical in terms of attachment and brain development. Your child has gone way past the first 1001 years as mine have by the time I started training. It's not too late. The brain has plasticity and you can attend to what was missed then. So we hope not to dishearten, but if you're a young parent or you're expecting first 1001 days, be very mindful. That's when the brain development of the brainstem is most critical.
Definitely. And I think I just want to kind of end on, I think it's important for pregnant women, I've done a small bit of work, but, women that are pregnant to also get some help and support, because it's a difficult time and there's a lot of pregnant women that need that help and support for themselves and for their unborn children. So, yeah, I'm a massive advocate for that. Come forward. If you're pregnant and struggling, it's important to come forward and access some support for you and your baby.
Yeah. Any final words, Karen?
I just second what Sarah said. Or any point, actually, through your experience of parenting. I think if you find that you are struggling and you recognize that actually either you are struggling or your child is struggling, please do get help. There are lots of services out there, and it is difficult sometimes to admit that we're struggling or to say that we're finding things difficult. But I'm really, really hoping that we are changing that now and that we are just encouraging people to say, look, I can't do it all. I am struggling, and please seek help and support.
Perfect. So that's it for this episode. It's a new year, but our contact details remain the same. Nothing's changed. Sarah, would you tell our listeners how they can reach us?
So we're on YouTube at Beautifully Melanated Podcast. We're also on Instagram, Beautifully Melanated Podcast. And you can catch us on our email, which is beautifullymelanatedpodcast@gmail.com. So you can also wing us an email as well.
Fabulous. We really look forward to hearing from you. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, ladies. Bye.
Beautifully.